At 42 years old, Emily Carter sat alone on the cold basement floor of her sister's house, staring at a laptop screen that showed exactly $8.13 left in her bank account. Just 6 months earlier, she had been driving to a six-figure corporate job in downtown Chicago, wearing tailored suits and carrying the kind of confidence people mistake for permanent success. But now her marriage was over. Her position had disappeared during a restructuring she never saw coming, and the same people who once praised her suddenly spoke about her like a cautionary tale. Friends stopped calling. Family members lowered their voices whenever she walked into a room. Even her own nephew overheard adults whispering that Emily had lost everything. What made it worse was that some of them almost sounded relieved about it. There is something painfully human about watching people become comfortable with your downfall once it lasts long enough. And Emily could feel it happening, in real time. The hardest part was not losing the money or the marriage. It was watching her identity disappear piece by piece until she barely recognized herself anymore. Every morning she woke up in that basement trying to remember the version of herself who used to lead meetings, mentor younger employees, and believe the future still belonged to her. Instead, she spent hours applying for jobs that never responded. Companies praised her experience during interviews, then quietly hired candidates half her age. Recruiters told her she was overqualified, which Emily eventually realized was simply a softer way of saying unwanted. One company rejected her 3 separate times in the same month. Another interviewer asked if she could keep up with younger energy. She smiled politely while hearing the message beneath the words. To them, Emily Carter represented something people fear in America more than failure itself. She represented becoming irrelevant. And yet the strangest part of this story is that none of those people understood what was really happening during those months in the basement. Because while Emily's life appeared to be collapsing from the outside, something else had quietly begun taking shape behind closed doors. Every rejection email, every awkward family gathering, every night spent crying silently so her sister would not hear her through the walls, slowly changed the way she saw the world. There is a certain kind of pain that either destroys a person or sharpens them into someone almost unrecognizable. Emily had spent most of her life following rules, trusting systems, and believing hard work would eventually protect her. But once all of that disappeared, she started noticing things she had ignored before. She noticed how invisible middle-aged women became in business spaces. She noticed how quickly society celebrated reinvention for younger entrepreneurs while quietly mocking older women who tried to start over. Most importantly, she noticed that millions of women felt exactly the same way she did, but almost nobody was talking to them. 3 years later, Emily Carter's face appeared in Forbes magazine beside a headline describing her as one of the most influential founders in America's emerging career economy. The same executives who ignored her ideas suddenly invited her to conferences. The same former coworkers who avoided her messages now posted photos beside her, pretending they had always believed in her vision. Investors competed for meetings with her. Podcast hosts called her inspirational. But none of those people knew about the nights Emily sat alone, refreshing her email, hoping someone would simply give her a chance to survive. None of them knew how close she came to giving up entirely. And none of them knew the real reason her company exploded into a multi-million-dollar movement almost overnight. Because Emily was not building a business out of ambition alone. She was building it out of humiliation, loneliness, rejection, and the quiet anger of realizing the world had already decided her story was over before she had the chance to rewrite it herself. Before we go deeper into Emily Carter's unbelievable transformation, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Because what happened next in Emily's story stunned even the people closest to her. The basement she cried in eventually became the birthplace of a company worth millions. The woman people called washed up would soon stand on stages, speaking to crowds who saw her as proof that life does not end after failure. But to understand how Emily reached that moment, we have to go back to the beginning. Back before the magazine covers, before the interviews, before the applause. Back to the version of Emily Carter who genuinely believed her life was finished. Because sometimes the most dangerous moment in a person's life is not when they lose everything. It is when they realize they have absolutely nothing left to lose. Emily Carter was born in a quiet suburb outside Milwaukee, to parents who believed stability mattered more than dreams. Her father worked the same manufacturing job for 34 years, and her mother spent most of her life working double shifts at a local clinic. In their home, success meant security. You found a reliable career, paid your bills on time, raised a family, and stayed grateful for whatever life gave you. Emily followed that formula almost perfectly. She was disciplined, intelligent, and dependable in ways that made adults admire her from a young age. Teachers described her as mature beyond her years, while other students talked about becoming artists or musicians. Emily talked about building a future where nobody in her family would ever have to worry about money again. There was always something deeply responsible about her, almost as if she had early that being dependable earned more love than being emotional. By the time she entered her 30s, Emily appeared to have built the exact life she once imagined. She married a financial consultant named Daniel Carter, bought a beautiful home in the Chicago suburbs, and climbed steadily through the corporate world until she became a senior marketing executive at a growing retail technology company. To outsiders, they looked like one of those polished American families people secretly compare themselves to online. Holiday photos showed smiling children beside matching Christmas sweaters. Their vacations looked expensive without appearing excessive. Emily hosted dinner parties where guests complimented her cooking while quietly admiring her kitchen renovation. But the truth hiding underneath that picture, perfect life, was far more fragile than anyone realized. Emily had spent so many years trying to become useful to everyone around her that she slowly stopped asking herself whether she was actually happy. Her marriage became more functional than emotional. Conversations with Daniel shifted from dreams and affection to schedules, bills, and obligations. They were no longer building a life together. They were managing one. Still, Emily ignored the growing emptiness because she believed sacrifice was part of adulthood. Then came the meeting that changed everything. It happened on a rainy Thursday morning inside a conference room, with glass walls overlooking downtown Chicago. Emily walked in expecting to present a campaign strategy she had spent months developing. Instead, she found two human resources representatives sitting beside her supervisor. The energy in the room felt wrong immediately. Nobody looked directly in the eyes. Her supervisor kept adjusting his tie while speaking in rehearsed corporate language about restructuring, efficiency, and changing company priorities. Emily barely heard the words after realizing what was happening. She had given 11 years of her life to that company, often working weekends and sacrificing time with her children to help it grow. And now her entire career there was ending in less than 10 minutes. What hurt most was not the layoff itself. It was discovering later that much of her work had quietly been handed to a younger executive she had personally trained. Emily drove home in complete silence that afternoon. She did not cry immediately. In fact, she felt strangely calm at first, almost disconnected from reality. But over the following weeks, the emotional weight of losing her job slowly settled over every part of her life. She started waking up in the middle of the night, unable to breathe properly. She stopped answering calls from friends because she could not bear hearing people ask how she was doing. Daniel initially tried to comfort her, but his patience slowly turned into frustration as months passed without improvement. Financial pressure increased quickly. Their savings began disappearing faster than either of them expected. Arguments became constant. Sometimes they fought over money, sometimes they fought over nothing at all. But beneath every conversation was the same unspoken fear neither of them wanted to admit. The version of life they built together was collapsing, and neither of them knew how to stop it. Then one evening, Emily accidentally saw a message appear on Daniel's phone while he was in the shower. She was not searching for evidence. She was simply sitting beside the phone when the notification appeared on the screen. The message itself was short, but it told her everything she needed to know. Emily later described that moment as strangely quiet, almost peaceful in a terrible way. Sometimes betrayal does not arrive with screaming or dramatic confrontations. Sometimes it arrives as confirmation of something your heart already suspected long before your mind accepted it. Daniel admitted he had been seeing someone else for several months. He claimed the affair started after Emily lost her job, though she was never certain whether that was true. What mattered was that the marriage she spent 17 years protecting suddenly felt unrecognizable, and in the middle of trying to rebuild her career, Emily now had to face the reality of losing her family too. The divorce moved quickly after that. Daniel rented an apartment downtown, while Emily temporarily moved into her sister Rebecca's basement with only a few suitcases, some framed family photos, and a growing sense that her entire identity had shattered within a single year. The emotional humiliation weighed on her constantly. She hated feeling dependent on other people at an age when she believed she should already have life figured out. Rebecca tried to help, but even kindness became painful because Emily interpreted every act of support as proof of her failure. During family gatherings, conversations became awkward whenever careers or finances came up. Some relatives offered advice Emily never asked for. Others gave her motivational speeches that sounded rehearsed and empty. A few quietly avoided her altogether, almost afraid failure itself might somehow become contagious. And through all of it, Emily kept hearing the same sentence repeated in different ways by different people. Maybe this chapter of your life is just over. Maybe you should accept something smaller now. Maybe you waited too long to start again. What nobody understood was that those words did not discourage Emily. They haunted her, because deep down she could not shake the feeling that her story was supposed to become something more than this. For weeks, Emily drifted through life like someone walking through the aftermath of a storm that nobody else could see. Every morning followed the same exhausting routine. Wake up before sunrise because anxiety would not let her sleep. Open her laptop. Search for jobs. Rewrite resumes. Send applications. Wait for responses that almost never came. The silence from employers became its own kind of emotional torture. At first, she checked her inbox every few minutes with nervous hope. Then every hour. Eventually, she stopped expecting replies at all. What frightened Emily most was how quickly the world adapted to her absence. The company she once sacrificed holidays for continued operating without her. Meetings still happened. Projects still launched. New employees filled the spaces where she used to stand. It forced her to confront a painful realization many people spend their entire lives avoiding. Most systems are designed to move forward no matter who gets left behind. One night around 2 in the morning, unable to sleep again, Emily found herself watching an interview with a female entrepreneur discussing career reinvention after 40. The woman spoke openly about age discrimination, divorce, financial collapse, and rebuilding confidence after public failure. Emily listened in silence while something shifted inside her. It was not inspiration in the dramatic movie sense. It was recognition. For the first time in months, she heard someone describe emotions she thought only she experienced. That single interview led to another, then another. Soon, Emily spent entire nights studying business founders, online marketing strategies, emerging technology platforms, and digital communities. Rebecca occasionally woke up early for work and found light still glowing beneath the basement door at 4 in the morning. Emily covered notebooks with ideas, observations, and questions about industries, ignoring older women entirely. Quietly, without telling anyone, she became obsessed with understanding why millions of capable women suddenly felt invisible after reaching middle age. At first, her attempts to turn those ideas into income failed completely. Emily launched a small consulting service, helping women update resumes and LinkedIn profiles. She spent weeks building the website, designing marketing materials, and convincing herself this could become the beginning of something meaningful. Almost nobody signed up. The few clients she gained quickly disappeared. Emily lost money she could barely afford to spend. One afternoon, she sat in her car outside a grocery store, crying because her credit card declined while trying to buy basic groceries. She considered giving up entirely after that moment, but failure had started changing her relationship with embarrassment itself. Earlier in life, Emily feared humiliation more than almost anything. Now she had already experienced divorce, unemployment, rejection, and financial collapse so publicly that fear began losing its power over her. She realized something dangerous during those months. Once society labels you a failure, you become strangely free. Free from expectations, free from maintaining appearances, free to attempt things people still protecting their reputation would never risk trying. That realization changed everything. Emily stopped chasing approval and started paying attention to problems other people ignored. She notices thousands of women sharing deeply personal stories inside online forums about restarting careers after divorce, caring for aging parents while searching for work, feeling invisible during interviews, and losing confidence after decades of sacrifice. Most companies targeting professional development focused on younger audiences, obsessed with hustle culture and startup fantasies. Almost nobody spoke directly to middle-aged women trying to rebuild their lives from the ground up. Emily understood them because she was one of them. So instead of pretending to be a polished expert, she began speaking honestly about fear, rejection, loneliness, and starting over. Her new platform, called Second Chapter, was originally nothing more than a small online community where women shared career advice and emotional support. Emily recorded videos from Rebecca's basement discussing job interviews, confidence, age discrimination, and financial recovery after divorce. She expected maybe a few dozen viewers. Instead, something remarkable happened. Women across America started sharing her content at an unbelievable pace. Messages flooded her inbox from teachers, nurses, former executives, stay-at-home mothers, widows, and women recovering from abusive marriages. Many of them said the same thing. Nobody had ever made them feel seen before. Emily's honesty became her greatest strength because people recognized pieces of themselves in her story. The community exploded within months. Online workshops sold out. Major publications began noticing Second Chapter. Podcast invitations appeared. Brands that once ignored women over 40 suddenly realized there was an enormous audience nobody had properly acknowledged. Emily worked constantly during that period, often sleeping only a few hours each night while managing rapid growth she never anticipated. But unlike her corporate career, this work felt personal. Every success story shared by another woman reminded Emily why she started. She was no longer trying to prove something only to herself. She was building a space for people the world quietly discarded after a certain age. Then came the moment that changed her life forever. Emily was sitting alone in a small rented office through webinar schedules when she received an email from a Forbes editor requesting an interview. At first, she assumed it was fake. She read the message repeatedly in disbelief before finally responding. Several weeks later, a photographer arrived to shoot portraits for the article. Emily later admitted, the experience felt surreal because part of her still identified more with the woman crying in a basement than the entrepreneur journalists suddenly described as visionary. When the article finally appeared online, it spread rapidly across social media. The headline described Emily Carter as one of the most influential voices helping women rebuild careers and confidence after 40. Within hours, her phone became impossible to manage. Former colleagues congratulated her publicly, despite ignoring her during her hardest years. Investors requested meetings. Television producers called. Even Daniel reached out, claiming he always knew she was capable of greatness. Emily stared at those messages with a strange mixture of satisfaction and sadness, because success had revealed something uncomfortable about human nature. Many people do not believe in you when belief requires patience. They believe after strangers confirm your value first. But the attention brought emotional complications Emily never expected. Public success did not erase the pain of what she survived. If anything, it amplified certain wounds. She struggled with trust because too many people suddenly wanted access to her after years of silence. She became exhausted, trying to separate genuine support from opportunism. There were nights she sat alone inside expensive hotel rooms after speaking at sold-out conferences, feeling just as lonely as she did in Rebecca's basement. Achievement changed her circumstances dramatically, but it did not magically heal every emotional scar created along the way. Emily eventually realized that revenge-based success carries a hidden danger. If proving people wrong becomes your primary motivation, you may wake up one day successful but emotionally empty. That realization forced her to redefine what winning actually meant. Instead of focusing only on expansion and profits, Emily quietly began funding programs helping divorced and unemployed women rebuild careers through mentorship, technology training, and financial support. She paid for interview coaching sessions, childcare assistance, and emergency grants without publicly attaching her name to most of it. She remembered too clearly what hopelessness felt like when nobody believed in her future anymore. Rebecca later said the most meaningful change in Emily was not the money or recognition. It was the way she started looking at people society overlooked. Emily no longer measured success through titles, salaries, or social status because she had personally experienced how quickly all those things could disappear. Years after the Forbes article transformed her into a national figure, Emily returned one afternoon to the basement room where everything started. Rebecca had converted it into a storage space, but Emily stood there quietly for several minutes, remembering the nights she thought her life was over. She remembered staring at rejection emails while hearing relatives discuss her like a disappointment. She remembered wondering whether middle age meant opportunities only moved backward from there. And Standing in that room again, Emily finally understood something that would eventually become the most quoted line from one of her speeches. People were not laughing at her because she lacked potential. They were laughing because they assumed struggle was the final chapter, instead of the beginning of transformation. The truth is, most people never witness what happens right before someone changes their life completely. They only see the outcome afterward and call it luck, talent, timing, or destiny. They do not see the isolation, rejection, humiliation, and fear hidden underneath the success story. Emily Carter's name eventually appeared in Forbes magazine, but that was never the real victory. The real victory happened much earlier, in a basement nobody cared about. During the nights, she continued believing her life still mattered, after the world stopped believing with her. And maybe that is why her story continues resonating with millions of people today, because somewhere tonight, another person is sitting alone feeling forgotten, embarrassed, financially broken, or convinced they missed their chance completely. And they are wondering the same question Emily once asked herself. Is it still possible to rebuild a life after losing almost everything? The answer, as Emily Carter eventually proved, is yes. But first, you have to survive long enough to become the person your hardest years were trying to create. Months after the Forbes article, Emily's life moved at a speed she once believed only happened to other people. Invitations arrived from universities, leadership conferences, television networks, and business organizations across the country. Women stood in long lines after her events waiting for a chance to hug her, cry with her, or simply tell her that her story stopped them from giving up on themselves. Some had lost marriages after decades together. Some had been pushed out of careers they dedicated their entire lives to. Others, mothers who sacrificed their dreams for their families and suddenly woke up one day, unsure who they were anymore. Emily listened to those stories carefully because every conversation reminded her of the woman she used to be. She understood the quiet grief that comes from feeling invisible in a world obsessed with youth and constant achievement. And while the public saw confidence whenever she walked onto a stage, Emily still carried memories of the basement, the rejection emails, and the nights she cried silently into a pillow so nobody would hear her breaking apart. One evening after speaking at a sold-out conference in Boston, Emily returned to her hotel room, exhausted and emotionally drained. Her assistant informed her that several major investors wanted to discuss expanding Second Chapter into an international platform. 10 years earlier, news like that would have made her feel unstoppable. But that night, she sat alone beside the hotel window staring down at the city, lights, feeling strangely disconnected from everything happening around her. Success had given her financial freedom, influence, and validation beyond anything she imagined, yet part of her still felt unsettled. The applause faded quickly once the rooms became quiet again. The interviews ended. The cameras disappeared. And underneath all the recognition, Emily still carried scars from the years she spent believing her value depended entirely on being useful, productive, and admired. Losing everything had forced her to rebuild her career. But now she realized she also needed to rebuild her understanding of herself. That realization became impossible to ignore after she unexpectedly crossed paths with Daniel again at a charity event in Chicago. It had been nearly 4 years since their divorce. Time had changed both of them. Daniel looked older, more tired, less certain of himself than Emily remembered. Their conversation remained polite at first, but eventually he admitted something that stayed with her, long after the event ended. He confessed that watching her rebuild her life forced him to confront uncomfortable truths about himself. During Emily Harry's hardest years, he had mistaken temporary struggle for permanent failure. He believed confidence came from stability, titles, and income, because that was how he measured his own worth too. But watching Emily rise after losing everything made him realize resilience mattered far more than comfort ever could. Emily listened quietly, without anger, because by then she no longer needed revenge to feel whole. Somewhere along the journey, she had stopped trying to prove her value to the people who abandoned her. She finally understood that closure does not always arrive through dramatic confrontations. Sometimes it arrives through indifference, through peace, through realizing the people who underestimated you no longer control how you see yourself. As Second Chapter continued growing, Emily became increasingly intentional about protecting the mission behind the company. Investors constantly pushed her to transform the platform into something more commercial and aggressive. They wanted faster expansion, larger profits, and broader audiences. But Emily refused to lose the emotional core that made the community powerful in the first place. She knew what happened when businesses stopped seeing people and started seeing only numbers. That exact mindset had discarded her years earlier during the corporate restructuring that nearly destroyed her life. So instead, she focused on building mentorship programs, scholarship funds, and partnerships, helping women over 40 re-enter the workforce with confidence and dignity. Thousands found employment through programs connected to Second Chapter. Some started businesses. Others returned to school. Many simply regained belief in themselves after years of feeling forgotten. Emily considered those transformations far more meaningful than magazine covers or public recognition. Still, there were moments when memories from her past returned unexpectedly. Certain songs reminded her of driving home after losing her corporate job. Certain neighborhoods brought back memories of arguments with Daniel during the final months of their marriage. Even now, years later, Emily occasionally woke up from dreams where she was trapped inside endless job interviews, hearing strangers politely explain why she was no longer what companies wanted. Trauma rarely disappears completely. It changes shape over time, it softens around the edges. But certain experiences leave permanent marks on the way people move through the world. Emily eventually stopped viewing those emotional scars as weaknesses. They became reminders of survival, proof that the version of herself, who once felt broken, managed to continue moving forward anyway. One of the most emotional moments of Emily's journey happened quietly, without media coverage or public attention. Late one afternoon, she visited Rebecca's house for dinner and noticed a framed copy of the Forbes article hanging near the staircase leading down to the basement. Emily stared at it silently for several seconds before Rebecca finally explained why she placed it there. She said she wanted a reminder that some people rebuild their lives in places the world overlooks. Emily immediately started crying because she realized her sister had witnessed every stage of the transformation before anyone else did. Rebecca saw the fear, exhaustion, humiliation, and uncertainty hidden behind the success story people now admired from a distance. She saw the version of Emily who sat awake at 3 in the morning, wondering if her children would secretly grow up ashamed of her. She saw the woman who almost gave up repeatedly but kept going anyway. And somehow that small framed article hanging beside the basement stairs meant more to Emily than all the recognition that came afterward. As the years passed, Emily's story spread far beyond business circles. Therapists referenced her interviews while helping clients navigate midlife transitions. Women shared her speeches with friends recovering from divorce or unemployment. Online comments beneath her videos filled with people admitting they had nearly lost hope before hearing her speak. What resonated most was not the money or the Forbes recognition. It was the honesty. Emily never pretended transformation happened quickly or cleanly. She openly discussed depression, shame, rejection, fear, and the emotional cost of rebuilding a life from nothing. In a culture obsessed with polished success stories, people connected deeply with someone willing to admit how painful reinvention truly feels while living through it. And maybe that is the most important part of Emily Carter's story. The world celebrates comeback stories after they become inspirational. But while someone is actually living through failure, society often treats them very differently. People admire resilience once it becomes successful. Before that, they usually call it desperation. Emily experienced both versions firsthand. She learned how quickly respect disappears when status disappears with it. She learned how uncomfortable failure makes people because it forces them to confront how fragile their own stability might actually be. Most importantly, she learned that rebuilding your life requires becoming comfortable continuing forward, even when nobody around you understands what you are trying to become yet. Today, Emily still keeps one object from her hardest years inside her office drawer. It is the original rejection letter from one of the companies that refused to hire her after she lost her corporate job. The final sentence reads, "We have decided to move forward with candidates whose experience better aligns with the future direction of our organization." Emily once cried for hours after reading those words. Now she keeps them as a reminder of how wrong the world can be about people during the chapters where they are still rebuilding themselves. Because sometimes the greatest transformations begin during seasons that look like complete failure to everyone watching from the outside. And somewhere tonight, another person is staring at an empty bank account, another rejection email, another broken relationship, or another dream that appears to be falling apart. Maybe they feel embarrassed. Maybe they feel forgotten. Maybe they think they waited too long to start again. Emily Carter once believed those same things while sitting alone in a basement, convinced her best years were behind her. But life has a strange way of changing direction when people refuse to let pain become the final sentence of their story. So the next time someone tells you your life is over because you failed, remember Emily Carter. Remember the woman people dismissed, ignored, and quietly gave up on. Remember the nights she cried alone, wondering she would ever matter again. And remember this above all else. The chapter where someone struggles the most is often the chapter where they are becoming the person they were always meant to be. The pressure surrounding Emily's success became impossible to escape after the Forbes feature transformed her from an entrepreneur into a public symbol. What started as a deeply personal mission suddenly became a brand everyone wanted ownership of. Television appearances turned into national interviews. Magazine profiles became conference tours. Journalists described her as the face of midlife reinvention, while strangers online analyzed every detail of her appearance, voice, relationships, and decisions. Emily had spent years fighting to feel visible again, but now she was learning visibility came with a cost nobody talks about openly. The internet does not simply celebrate people, it consumes them. And somewhere between the applause, sponsorships, interviews, and growing expectations, Emily started feeling herself disappear all over again, only this time beneath success instead of failure. At first, the criticism arrived quietly. A few online comments accused her of exaggerating her struggles for sympathy. Others claimed she only succeeded because she was attractive, educated, or lucky enough to fail comfortably. Emily tried ignoring it, but criticism spreads quickly once people begin building emotional connections to someone's story. Some former coworkers publicly disputed her version of events at the company where she was laid off. One article questioned whether Second Chapter was becoming commercialized inspiration. A podcast host implied Emily had turned trauma into a marketing strategy. None of the accusations were entirely true, but they affected her more than she admitted publicly, because beneath the confidence and polished interviews still lived the woman who once measured her worth through other people's approval. And no amount of success completely silences the fear of being misunderstood. The most painful tension developed inside her own family. Emily's children, Tyler and Madison, struggled privately with the sudden attention surrounding their mother. During her hard years, they watched her cry, panic over bills, and question whether life would ever stabilize again. Now cameras followed her through airports while audiences stood and applauded whenever she entered rooms. The transition felt confusing for them. Tyler once admitted he sometimes missed the version of his mother who had time to simply sit beside him and watch movies without answering business calls every 10 minutes. Madison became increasingly withdrawn whenever Emily traveled for long stretches. One evening after returning from Los Angeles, Emily overheard her daughter telling a friend on the phone, "The whole world feels like it gets more of my mom than we do now." That sentence stayed with Emily for weeks because it exposed something she desperately wanted to avoid becoming. She had rebuilt her life to protect her family from instability, but somewhere along the way she risked becoming emotionally absent in a completely different way. Meanwhile, Second Chapter continued expanding faster than anyone anticipated. Investors pushed aggressively for national partnerships, subscription models, and international growth. Emily's executive team insisted this was the moment to maximize momentum before competitors entered the market. On paper, everything looked extraordinary. Revenue soared. Membership exploded into the millions. Corporate partnerships flooded in. But privately, Emily felt increasingly disconnected from the company she originally built inside Rebecca's basement. Meetings became dominated by discussions about market share, monetization, and scalability, instead of real women rebuilding their lives. She noticed subtle shifts in company culture too. Some executives began referring to users as engagement metrics rather than people. Emotional support programs Emily cared deeply about were described as financially inefficient. The language reminded her too much of the corporate environments that once reduced human beings into placeable numbers. Then came the betrayal that nearly destroyed everything. It started with a leaked internal document exposing plans to dramatically restructure Second Chapter into a far more profit-driven platform. The proposal included removing free support services, increasing membership costs, and prioritizing wealthier demographics attractive to advertisers. Emily was horrified because she never approved those decisions. But what shocked her most was discovering the proposal came from several senior executives she personally trusted. Investors had quietly spent months pressuring leadership behind her back, believing Emily's emotional attachment to the mention prevented the company from reaching its true financial potential. News of the leak spread rapidly online. Members accused Second Chapter of exploiting vulnerable women for profit. Social media backlash exploded overnight. Headlines questioned whether Emily Carter had become exactly the kind of corporate leader she once criticized publicly. For the first time since rebuilding her life, Emily genuinely feared losing everything again. She spent days isolated inside her office, reading comments from women who felt betrayed by they trusted deeply. Some canceled memberships. Others posted emotional videos explaining how much the platform once meant to them before feeling abandoned. Emily barely slept during that period. Memories from her collapse years earlier returned intensely. The anxiety, the panic attacks, the overwhelming fear that her identity was collapsing publicly once again. One night, Rebecca found her sitting alone in the office, staring silently at old photographs from the early basement days. Emily admitted through tears that she no longer recognized the company she fought so hard to build. Success had slowly surrounded her with people obsessed with growth, influence, and money, until she almost lost sight of why she started everything in the first place. The board demanded immediate damage control. Public relations consultants prepared carefully scripted apologies. Investors wanted Emily to distance herself emotionally and reassure markets about profitability. Instead, she did something nobody expected. Emily scheduled a live broadcast and spoke directly to the audience without scripts, executives, or media coaching. Millions watched as she sat alone in a plain room wearing almost no makeup, looking emotionally exhausted in a way audiences had never seen before. She admitted the company lost direction. She admitted she ignored warning signs because part of her became addicted to success itself. Most importantly, she apologized honestly without trying to protect her image. Emily explained that she built Second Chapter for women who felt discarded by the world. And somewhere along the way, she stopped protecting those people from the same systems that once hurt her, personally. The response stunned everyone. Instead of destroying her reputation, the honesty rebuilt trust stronger than before. Thousands of women flooded social media praising her willingness to admit mistakes publicly instead of hiding behind corporate language. Membership cancellations stopped almost immediately. More importantly, Emily finally understood something she spent her entire life learning too late. People do not connect deeply with perfection. They connect with truth. And the truth was that Emily Carter remained a human being still learning how to carry success without losing herself inside it. Within weeks, she forced major structural changes inside Second Chapter. Executives involved in the restructuring proposal resigned or were removed entirely. Free mentorship programs expanded instead of disappearing. Emily reduced investor influence dramatically despite financial risks. Analysts warned the decisions could slow company growth, but for the first time in years, Emily no longer cared about appearing endlessly successful. She cared about alignment, about integrity, about becoming the kind of leader she once desperately needed during the darkest period of her own life. Months later, during a leadership conference in Seattle, Emily delivered what many people now consider the defining speech of her career. Near the end of the presentation, she paused for several seconds before sharing a story she had never told publicly before. She described sitting alone in Rebecca's basement years earlier, staring at a mirror, after another rejection email arrived. She admitted there was a moment she genuinely believed the world would move on happier without her in it. The audience fell completely silent. Emily explained that success did not save her life. Meaning did, purpose did, feeling useful to other hurting people did. And then she said something that spread across the internet within hours. The people who called me a failure were measuring my life during the chapter where I was rebuilding. But rebuilding is not failure. Rebuilding is preparation. Many people watching that speech assumed the line sounded powerful because it was carefully written. In reality, Emily spoke from memory, because she remembered exactly what it felt like when the world looked at her brokenness and assumed the story ended there. But it didn't, and that is why her story continues reaching millions of people across different countries, generations, and walks of life. Because deep down, most people know what it feels like to fear becoming irrelevant, to wonder whether they waited too long, To lose relationships, careers, confidence, identity, or direction. Emily Carter became successful, yes. Her name appeared in Forbes. Her company transformed thousands of lives. But the true reason her story matters has very little to do with money or fame. It matters because somewhere tonight another person is sitting quietly in their own version of Rebecca's basement. Maybe it is a tiny apartment. Maybe it is a hospital room. Maybe it is a parked car after losing a job. Maybe it is a kitchen table covered in overdue bills while everyone else sleeps upstairs. And that person feels convinced life already passed them by. Emily Carter once felt exactly the same way. Then the world that dismissed her became the world forced to say her name.